is the author of the book Stealing Elections, How Voter Fraud Threatens Our Democracy. It was first in 2004, is in its second edition, and it seems to be apropos based on what we've seen over the last few weeks, and perhaps if you watched Fox and Friends this morning and some of the other television shows, you're familiar that while Joe the plumber may have a lien of $1,000 against him, or $500, I've lost the figure, Acorn has liens up into the millions of dollars against them and what they have done. John's going to speak not only about that issue, and we also have copies of John's book that will be on sale in the back if you would like that. He's going to speak obviously about what will be happening a week from today and what John has seen. We were driving up from Orlando this morning, and John was doing a radio interview with NPR and was giving them the business on what they wanted to say, as you can imagine, what they wanted him to say versus what was actually happening. So I would ask you to join me in welcoming John Fund.
Well, I've been to Jacksonville many times, and believe me, it is a blessed relief to get back to such a friendly and sunny place. Right now it is storming in New York. And I also am pleased because I know that so many of you are either readers or subscribers to the Wall Street Journal, so at least I could do the time to thank you for helping me pay my salary, which you do. I know that I have a book to talk about, but I also know that you have questions, so I'm going to get to your questions as quickly as possible. Working at the Wall Street Journal, I try to meet market demand. But I would be happy after the talk to sign copies of the book, because it's very appropriate for Florida, because it was the chaos and the confusion that resulted from the 2000 elections that prompted me to write this book. Because I learned something from that. A lot of people in Florida, of course, have nothing to do with the dramatic series of coincidences, events, and sloppiness that made you sort of a byword for ballot confusion in America. And on the other hand, though, the way it turned out, we ended up with a large percentage of Americans being very cynical about the process. If you look at polls, 40% of Americans today don't have very much confidence their ballot is counted accurately or fairly. And what I was concerned about after Florida was all of the discussion and argument was on one side of the equation about voter suppression, voter intimidation. Well, Janet Reno's Justice Department under Bill Clinton sent down a squadron of people to try to find out who had been suppressed or prevented from voting in Florida. They spent 10 weeks here. They came up with nada, zip. There certainly were problems. In Jacksonville, for example, I think there was a problem in printing the ballot. I know that up in one of the counties near Tallahassee, they had incredible error rates. Of course, we all know about the butterfly ballot in Palm Beach County, which of course was designed by Teresa Lepore, the Democratic Board of Elections chairman. But we heard a lot of stories, though. It's almost entered myth about what really happened in Florida. There's a whole chapter in my book called The Whole Story of Florida. And just to give you one example of how one-sided the news coverage was, how many of you have heard about this infamous list that Catherine Harris farmed out to some private computer company to get a list of felons, and they came back with a whole bunch of names of people who weren't felons, who weren't allowed to vote, even though the list was supposed to be scrubbed. It turned out there were a lot of mistakes. How many of you have heard about that famous list? Okay, a lot. How many of you have heard about the investigation by the Palm Beach Post and the Miami Herald that found the following interesting set of facts? How many people who were not felons were improperly put on that list and actually prevented from voting? How many would you like to guess? It's only about 800. But with the Palm Beach Post and Miami Herald, newspapers that don't normally on the conservative side, what they found is there were 5,800 felons in Florida in 2000 who were on the voter rolls and did vote. How many of you have heard about that story? I rest my case. In other words, far more people voted who shouldn't have voted on that basis than people who were prevented from voting. Now, I'm not making excuses for either mistake. I'm simply saying you've only been given half of the story. The rest of the story is in my book. Now, the problem persists. The Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel just this month reported there are 49,000 felons on the voter registration rolls in Florida who are ineligible to vote. Now, that's one problem. Here's the second problem. 5,000 of them are apparently regular voters. You've had close elections in Florida. 2000 was decided by 537 votes. Once again, you could have a close election in Florida. It would be a shame if phantom voters, voters who shouldn't be voting, make up the difference. Because just remember, the one thing that's different now between Florida 2000 and today is this. We could afford a domestic spat over butterfly ballots and hanging chads in 2000. Remember, that was before 9/11, before the War on Terror. We were also at a time of great prosperity. The Consumer Confidence Index was reached the highest point it had in modern American history the week of that election. Today, if I read the newspapers, we're having a little bit of a financial problem. And we have a war on terror, and we have wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we have enemies like North Korea and Iran and Hugo Chavez's Venezuela, and things are a little more complicated. Whoever becomes president next week, I hope takes office with the full legitimacy and credibility of the election. Because we can't afford to have a president who doesn't have the full confidence of everyone, regardless of who that is. We need to come together after this election. And if we have another bitter, contested race, I fear that that will make it more difficult. And let me tell you, you're going to see all kinds of bitterness if this race is close, and I think it still may well be. We'll get to that in the question and answer session. Because if you compare the election conditions in Florida and other states to the election conditions or the conditions in a forest at the end of a dry summer season where there's a lot of dry underbrush, everything is just as flammable. It could lead to disaster as in 2000. We've made some progress, but in other places, Florida has made more progress than most states, but in some places they've made actually less progress. If you compare those conditions in 2000 to today, you have just as much potential for disaster, but you've got a lot more people with matches running around. They're called lawyers. 14,000 lawyers are volunteering or working for the McCain or the Obama campaign. 14,000 lawyers around the country. I don't know about you. I don't think 14,000 lawyers is good for our democracy. I think there are going to be problems, and they should be pursued. But the chances of recounts, recriminations, and rogue lawsuits extending once again and making election day to election month is a real danger. A real danger. And I don't want to see that. What can we do before that? We can do the following. For one thing, there is still time. There's still time, believe it or not, a week before election to give high school and college kids some class credit if they get some basic training and help out at the polls. The average poll worker is 70 years old. They're not used to some of the new machines. They're not used to some of the new procedures. Frankly, they're not used to a horde of new voters who've never voted yelling at them and demanding, that they have the right to vote even if there's names on the registration list. Secondly, I think we need a lot more election observers and monitors. I know that that's controversial, but frankly, we need to preserve two civil rights in this country. The first civil right that we have is to cast a ballot free of fear and intimidation. And we fought a long civil rights struggle in the 1960s.